Welcome back to another version of ARCA's Elevated Views. Today I get the pleasure of sitting down with Gord Rajewski, a longtime ARCA accepted inspector who's taken a deep dive into something not a lot of people know about, and that is blue roofs. Welcome, Gord.
Thank you, Kevin. It's my privilege and pleasure to be here with you today.
So, Gord, I'll ask the question right out of the gate. When people started talking about blue roofs, you probably get a lot of quizzical faces. What is a blue roof?
A blue roof is a roof that has been created, designed carefully to act as a reservoir for water that comes from the sky. Essentially, the concept is that we can use the top of our buildings, flat roofs primarily, as a collection or retention pond for the water that is provided from rain. There are many different reasons why this is an idea that's worth exploring, particularly in Canada and elsewhere. As climate change continues to advance, as the weather changes, the patterns that we're used to are no longer the same. What used to be a 100-year rainstorm is now a 10-year rainstorm. In places like southern Alberta and northern Alberta, all over, we have scenarios where the rain that we get may not come in as many days in the month. So we're seeing scenarios where it's longer between rainfalls that we get rain. The number of days between rain is becoming extended. But when we do get rain, it's with greater intensity. Usually these are storms that are being driven by high wind. If this continues, as it's predicted it will in Canada, what's going to happen is we're going to be drier. We're going to have more arid conditions here in southern Alberta and in Alberta in general. And so the opportunity to try to harvest the available rainfall is going to become more of an urgent thing. The other thing is, as we continue to grow and build in our cities like Calgary, we all are familiar with the never-ending debates at City Hall that there's not enough money to build the right infrastructure. Infrastructure spending is falling behind. The expenditures on infrastructure are being deferred, right? This past summer, Calgary and Calgarians went through a period of forced water conservation because of the need to repair the underground water lines. Where am I going with that? The municipal stormwater systems in most large cities in Canada, and small towns as well, are not being upgraded, maintained, or replaced to the extent required to meet the challenges of extreme climate change. The insurance industry is interested in promoting ideas on Canadian buildings where rainwater can be retained for as long as possible to prevent or mitigate against overland flooding.
It's a great idea, and I can see where it's going with, like you say, we do see our climatic conditions changing. They're reevaluating the different rain loads that are going in for the different code cycles.
Yep.
Is this something that only Canada has seen, or other areas in the world? Have they thought of this already, or is this kind of a brand new thing?
It's more of a new idea in Canada, but certainly in parts of the U.S. In San Francisco, for instance, municipal government of the city of San Francisco mandates that you need to introduce measures on your commercial buildings to try to harvest rainwater for the purpose of A, reducing the potential for overland flooding during intense rainfalls. So this isn't about building green roofs because green roofs are nice, and who doesn't like a nice garden on their roof? We'll get into that, but this is more about the fact that the intensity of rainfall is increasing. So what was a 100-year rain is now a 10-year rain. And we also at the same time have to deal with the fact that we may have drought. So it's not going to rain as much on as many days, but when it rains, it's going to come down hard. So what's the opportunity to harvest the water, but at the same time prevent all of that water being drained off your roof, immediately rushing into the storm system that hasn't been upgraded since the 60s or 70s. And it can't take the volume. So that water is going to back up. It's going to go all over your property and probably cause damage to your building in other ways.
So what are they going to do with all this water? So say you have a commercial building and you do retain some of it, either on the roof. I recall you saying in areas like New York, they have water tanks just below the roof.
Right.
What can that water be used for?
Many different things. Integrate the concept of a blue roof with a green roof. So if you have a rooftop garden, if you have vegetation, grass, plants, small shrubs on your roof, in addition to having a designed and planned for reservoir, you can use that water to irrigate the stuff on your roof. At the same time, water that's being retained in the reservoir created by the blue roof can be used in the gray water system inside your building. So flushing toilets, running other systems that don't require drinking water. You can also use it to irrigate the landscaping on your site. You can also use it in air conditioning systems, like systems that require water to promote cooling. So again, any place where you don't need to filter it to be able to use it for human consumption, you can use the retained water on your roof for other purpose.
I always kind of chuckle because even in some of the classes that we teach, the roofing community is quite diverse from Eastern Europe to the Philippines, and they literally laugh at Canadians as we use potable water to irrigate our grass and to irrigate our gardens and everything else. So this is a very interesting scenario that could happen. Can any roof be a blue roof?
Blue roofs are best suited for brand new design. The reason being is there's a lot more thinking that needs to go into how to create a blue roof and make it work well. Not every building can tolerate the load demanded by having a reservoir on the roof. By introducing the concept of a reservoir on your roof, you are also introducing additional load to a structure that was never intended for that purpose. Many existing buildings, in particular pre-engineered metal structures, without significant design alteration and reinforcement, be able to tolerate the additional load that would be imposed by this system. Many of the concrete structures that we have downtown, with some thinking and thought in general, could probably be adapted for some version of a blue roof. I may be giving our listeners the impression that we're talking about swimming pools, where in fact blue roofs are actually waffle panels that are only a couple of inches in height. So you're not necessarily storing an Olympic-sized swimming pool's worth of water on your roof. You're storing more water than the roof would normally receive or have after a rainfall until the water goes down the drain.
So we're not talking like 12 inches to 18 inches of water sitting on top of the roof.
No.
It's more like upwards of maybe 6.
Or less. The idea is if you had the will and the money and were thoughtful in your creation, you could create an Olympic-sized swimming pool on your roof if that's what you really wanted to. But obviously, the supportive structure that would be required to accommodate that kind of situation would be much different than most developers or owners would want to talk about, right? But we do have high-rise buildings in Calgary that have swimming pools on the top. What's the difference? You're just opening up the roof and filling the pool, right? I guess. Not every building is a candidate. I guess that's the point. As we continue to introduce densification into our cities, as more people come to our cities, we were trying to reduce everything from heat island to the amount of energy that's being sent up to the atmosphere, as we're trying to make our roofs work harder for us beyond just keeping the elements out. And we're introducing amenity spaces, gardens, all of these different things. I think there's a place to have reservoirs on roofs if it's planned in the right way.
Can a reservoir on the roof, it probably affects not only the structural load, but it will also impact the mechanical load on the building.
Yes. Before our session today, I told you about a furniture store that always comes to mind when I think about these things. So in the 70s, many, what we'll call them commercial retail buildings, like furniture stores, used to have sprinkler systems, sprinkler arrays on the rooftop. And these were in the days when modern air conditioning wasn't available. A cheap way to cool the air inside your store in June and July and August was to sprinkler your roof. That idea went away because people figured it was A, a waste of water, and B, because you actually had to have a good roof to prevent that water that was cooling your air from seeping inside your store and causing damage. But there still are, on some of the older buildings, you'll still see the remnants of the sprinkler array up on the roof.
With that, you were also saying you're going to have that additional water on the roof. How robust does the roofing membrane and the roofing system have to be on a blue roof?
Recommendation for a blue roof waterproofing system, it needs to be very robust. So we're talking about probably a fully adhered membrane system, but we would also recommend integrating electronic field vector into the system, because the more separation you have between the part of the roof that's keeping the water from getting into your building and the exterior of the roofing assembly, it means more challenge for the roofer who will have to come and fix the leak, right? If you're going to go to this added design feature called a blue roof, also integrating some of the technology that we currently have available around electronic field vector mapping. Oh, it's not mapping, but it's the actual electronic grid that can be integrated into the system. So if there's a breach of the waterproofing, an alarm is signaled, and now we can at least direct the roofer to a grid location of where the breach is. So you're not tearing up the whole roof to get at one pinhole. You're going right to the general area of where the pinhole is.
Now, with these climate projections that people are making, would it be something to think about in the design, or is there such a thing called a blue-ready roof? You put a lot of the components in from structural and mechanical,
Yep.
but maybe you don't go the whole way,
Yeah.
because there is a cost associated with it.
Yes.
Until a point where I think a lot of these climate initiatives and initiatives with the higher rainfall and everything, they're great in theory and have solid research backing on them, but unless there is an incentive or a mandate for people to do these,
Yep.
I think it might be hard to get them installed. Do you share that same thought?
Yes. When I talk about sort of my passion for this idea, it's really a larger conversation about how to make Canadian buildings more resilient in the face of extreme weather, climate change. That being said, I understand very well that many developers are driven by the lowest common denominator cost. So the cheaper I can build it, the better for me, because I'm the developer, it's my money, and I want to maximize my return should I want to sell this asset in the future. Right now, the incentive for Canadian developers and building owners is actually being driven by ESG. So ESG, for our listeners, is environmental, social, and governance, a set of mandatory disclosure reporting that many of our Canadian building owners, portfolio owners, developers are obligated to prepare annually for their institutional investors. The big money guys who don't live in Canada, probably elsewhere offshore, who are going to demand that some of these ideas be implemented into Canadian building stock. The other way that blue roofs will become a thing more than they are now is if the City of Calgary mandates other jurisdictions have that a percentage of your rooftop for your new building must have green, it must be solar reflective, or it might be blue. That's what's going to happen. It's going to be mandated by code. Smart people will see that there is value in creating these designs for what is to come in the future, which is high intense rain followed by more arid conditions in between rain. Another way to look at how that can work is many of our developers in Canada are looking for the best deal to finance their construction, get their developments done. So they will deal with CMHC to get preferred mortgage rates. An example of how this blue roof idea can be implemented is CMHC says, okay, Mr. Developer, if you would like a 50-year mortgage, the bank will only give you 30, but I can give you a 50. But you have to meet one or two of these three criteria to get our preferred lending. And one is it's got to be affordable. So some percentage of your building must be affordable to those Canadians that aren't wealthy. It must be accessible. So persons with disabilities can access your building. Or it has to meet or exceed the threshold for energy performance. That is a thing right now. So developers are lining up to try to get the CMHC mortgage. It makes sense for their bottom line to do so. Right now, the three big ones are affordability, accessibility, and energy. But in the future, it could be resiliency. And resiliency could be defined by create a blue roof.
To make that resilient, and we also talked beforehand how surprising it is that in Canada, resiliency in the building stock isn't thought of that much. Well, if I can get especially a commercial retail unit, if I can get 40 years out of that building, I'm good. Then I'll tear it down. Then I can build another one. So I believe this goes a long way to helping change that mindset that once we build it, we want to build it to last 100 plus years. And these are some of the items that we can include on that to make it happen.
So my journey into understanding more about climate change and blue roofs, green roofs, and different roofs, I was interested in this area of study because most of my colleagues in consulting engineers at the time when I first became interested were all really following trends around energy performance and sustainability. So everybody had to learn how to become an energy modeler and figure out how to make the building model work so that we could demonstrate that our designs were more efficient than they were 5 years ago. And all of that's warranted and great. The problem is if you lived in Fort McMurray, Alberta or Jasper, Alberta, and you're surrounded by boreal forest and the forest catches on fire, and you are one of many individuals who suffered traumatic loss from wildfire. In that time when the wildfire is burning and it's about to engulf your community, you don't care about energy performance, you care about survivability. So what I've learned since I made that connection is it's very difficult today to go to a designer, a developer, and say, we need to introduce these measures to make the building more resilient. Will you pay for that? Few will. They can't associate the return on that investment, right? So it's incumbent upon the community of engineers and designers and architects and contractors to look at ways that you can create resiliency in your design, make the thing look beautiful, and not make it cost too much. So that's a big challenge, but there aren't enough reasons for developers to get onto the bandwagon to build blue roofs and create resilient design.
Do you also feel that other industries could impact the importance and the impotence for blue roofs? Like, would insurance have a say as well in this? Because you see the big events that have happened. You mentioned Fort McMurray and Jasper, but even flooding in Calgary and overland flooding in several areas, it ends up costing them a lot.
You raise an excellent point. As I was learning about what may come in 2035 and 2050 as the earth warms and things get worse weather-wise and climate-wise, One of the things that I became aware of is the insurance industry is about 10 years ahead of everyone else in their research and analysis of climate change trends, because they're the ones paying for the problems. So when there's a hailstorm in Calgary and it takes out part of the northeast of Calgary's vinyl siding and all of its shingles and parked cars at car lots, they're the ones writing that check. Canadian building owners who are required to carry insurance for their properties are putting forth proposals to insurance companies that insurance companies can get behind in terms of mitigating loss. There will likely be an opportunity for those particular building owners to receive a benefit through reduced premiums. If you can convince the insurance company that what you're doing is going to save them money somewhere down the road, they'll get behind you. When I was a wee young lad learning to do infrared thermography, we would go run around the tall buildings in downtown Calgary and we would scan every year the electronic switchgear on each floor. I was doing it because it was a job and I was required to do it. But the reason these companies were doing it was if they did an infrared scan of their electrical panels and their electrical distribution on an annual basis, they got a reduced fire insurance premium. They do it because it saves them money. And the insurance company will back things that will save them money. A blue roof, from the insurance company's perspective, they don't care what you do with the water, as long as it doesn't all drain down into the storm system, back up and cause overland flooding, which causes them to write checks. So if we can retain or detain the water, as it were, somewhere on the site, preferably on the roof, the insurance company will look favorably on that, and you may get preferred consideration for your insurance.
All of this has been kind of eye-opening when it comes to the different areas and how big the subject matter is on this. Is there anything that we kind of missed or glossed over that you'd like to bring up about blue roofs as well?
It's funny, I was just speaking to a colleague yesterday, and this is a landscape architect, okay? So this is a person who has a lot more knowledge about how to make things grow well on commercial sites and residential sites. And she just happens to live in Abbotsford, BC. Most would know British Columbia is a much more temperate climate than Alberta's climate, and things grow better and differently than they do here in the prairies. I told her that I was invited to share some of my afternoon today with you, Kevin. She said, do you know that in Vancouver, which is one of the greenest places, and green in this context means they will gladly pay 25 cents more per liter of gas at the pump because they believe that they're doing something better for their environment, right? So it's a very socialized green place, we'll call it. But developers in BC are reluctant to do green roofs because they don't see the return on investment. So it all comes back to that mighty dollar. I believe one way or another, ideas like blue roofs will become a norm, maybe not in 2024, but in the next 5 years, we'll be talking more about these things and other things as well as it relates to responding to extreme climate. It's going to happen because the insurance company is going to drive it. So big insurance will drive it, and then government will drive it. So they'll either incentivize you through grants or they'll make it punitive through taxes. One way or another, Canadian building owners are going to have to step up at some point.
Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us this afternoon. I think our listeners will step away with a greater understanding and things to think about, especially when they're looking to design or looking to talk about the designs with building owners of hopefully their new blue roof. Thanks, Gord.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you for listening to another episode of ARCA's Elevated Views. We hope you have enjoyed the program. For additional information on ARCA, our contractors, or our program, please go to arcaonline.ca. Or you could follow us on Instagram at Roofing Careers or on LinkedIn at ARCA-Alberta Roofing Contractors Association. Thanks and have a great day.